and welcome to this episode of India and the World on DeKoder. I'm Nidhi Razdan. Well, if you've been tracking geopolitics, especially in the last 24 hours, believe me, this has been one twist and turn after another, and sometimes you feel it's really hard to keep up. The US Iran war. President Donald Trump has said that he's talking to Iran, that they're trying to work out what he described as a very good deal. However, the Iranian government at first has on record denied any such conversation with the Americans. Then there have been multiple reports that the two sides are actually in touch and are trying to work towards holding talks at some point. And in the middle of all of this, reports have also emerged in the Financial Times of the UK that Pakistan is playing mediator, and a meeting in Islamabad between US and Iranian officials could take place sometime this week. And that opens up a whole new dynamic for India in terms of the implications for India's security, for the region's security, and its own relationship with the US. And in the last few minutes, we've just heard from the US ambassador to India that President Trump has spoken to Prime Minister Modi today about the situation in the region and about the Strait of Hormuz, which is important to allow our fuel supplies, our oil and gas supplies to reach India and indeed to other parts of the world as well. So there is a lot to unravel here, and lots of conspiracy theories also floating around on the internet, which we'd like to get into just a little bit with Professor Alex Vatanka. He's a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C., born in Tehran and now very much a Washingtonian. Thank you very much, Professor Vatanka, for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me. Pleasure.
So, first off the bat, what do you make of Trump's claims that some kind of negotiations are going on with Tehran? Is he on the back foot? Is that why he said this? Is he looking for an off-ramp? Or, as some people seem to suggest today, that he could be preparing for a ground assault and this is just a distraction?
Yeah, look, I mean, here in Washington, D.C., increasingly the sense is that Donald Trump was basically convinced to attack Iran by Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel on a very simple sales pitch, if you will, that this Iranian regime is weak, it's hated by its people, and that if United States intervenes militarily, it'll be a quick victory militarily, and Donald Trump will be the hero of the Iranian people and Middle East and the world beyond. That's how Donald Trump got into this war. There is no evidence that he did a lot of thinking about the diplomatic, geopolitical component of this. He was fixated on the military part because he thought a military victory would quickly topple the regime. And as we all know, that didn't happen. And that's why Donald Trump right now is trying to figure out what he should do next. He's zigzagging. We don't really know what his end objective is. Is it regime change? He is now talking about meeting with some folks from this Iranian regime, which means that he's willing to accept the Islamic Republic. But Ali Khamenei dead, somebody else could talk to him. So he's all over the place. He hasn't made up his mind. But one thing we do know for sure, he is extremely upset about how the Iranians, through their actions, have essentially impacted the global economy, particularly in the energy side of things. He wants to end that as soon as he can. But again, that's not his call. Iran has a say in this war now that this war is launched.
And what is your sense of Iran's willingness to have these negotiations at this point? Because clearly by blocking the Strait of Hormuz or disallowing a number of ships from passing through, the Iranians in a sense do have the upper hand because everybody then feels the pain.
They do have the upper hand, certainly when it comes to this traffic out of the Strait of Hormuz. But if I was Iran, I wouldn't be overconfident because right now a lot of countries are, not willing to join the United States and Israel in this war. The Europeans, the Gulf countries, but that could change. They could decide that they have no choice but to join this war and go for something much larger in terms of a project, a nation building project, a regime change project, if you will. So Iran needs to be careful, and I think they are. So they're not rejecting diplomacy out of hand. What they're saying is diplomacy that is different from past rounds. They obviously, from their point of view, they were negotiating with the Americans twice, and under each attempt of diplomacy, they were attacked. So that's their position. And, in many ways, that's understandable that there's no trust there. But again, Iran can't stay in this war forever. And therefore, if I think Washington can offer them something that looks like an off-ramp, this regime might take it. But we haven't seen how that off ramp might look like as of today.
And part of what I asked in the first question was the concerns that more American Marines, thousands, we are told in reports, are heading towards the Middle East, even as we speak, and that this could be a sort of ploy to, everyone lets their guard down, and then there is a ground invasion. There are boots on the ground, Karg Island perhaps being one of those targets, which, of course, as we know, is from where Iran, exports some 90% of its oil. So, are you worried about that being the next turn in this war?
Look, I think we should all be worried about escalation in this war because it can only go up the ladder, and it's not good for Iran. It's not good for the United States' interest. It's not good for Israel, and it's certainly not good for countries like the Arab countries of the Persian Gulf. Everybody's suffering right now. It's really, I mean, people point to Russia as a winner because the price of oil has gone up so much. But fundamentally, this is a war that everybody's suffering from. But as far as escalation is concerned, because you mentioned the Marines, that would be an escalation. But again, in the absence of a strategic end goal in mind, what does it actually mean to send a few thousands of Marines to Iran? They're not going to be able to occupy Iran. If you talk to military strategists, they'll tell you you need hundreds of thousands of American troops to do what the United States did in Iraq in 2003. And again, reminding everybody, Iran is 4 times the size of Iraq. It's a mountainous country, not like Iraq, a flat country. So very difficult military proposition. There is no sign that Donald Trump can convince Americans to occupy Iran. So, the use of the Marines could be tactically important in certain aspects, maybe opening the Strait of Hormuz by occupying parts of the territory. But then they're going to be sitting targets because the Iranians are going to hit them. That means Americans are going to die on Iranian soil. And that's exactly what Donald Trump promised everyone who would never do in the Middle East. And now he's taking the country potentially to the biggest war in American history.
And we know he's not exactly a man who keeps his word. But again, coming to possibly these peace talks, if they do ever happen, who would the Americans realistically be able to talk to? Is it true that there is a divergence of opinion even within Iran between the IRGC and the civilian leadership, as it were, about which path to pursue?
Look, I think fundamentally, this is how I look at it. There is a civilian component to the Islamic Republic, as you correctly pointed out, but they're busy trying to run the country's daily affairs, running power and water and utility services. They're not the ones who are going to call the shots when it comes to those strategic important conversations, potentially with the Americans. To see who will do that, you need to look at the ranks of the Revolutionary Guards. They are essentially the power that is in charge of Iran today. But here's perhaps the good news. They are hardliners in many ways. They're upset. They want revenge, but they're not suicidal. So in the right sort of circumstances, if they have a way out of this, they want to live too. They want to go back and run that country. They have nowhere to go. There's no sanctuary for a Revolutionary Guards general. Where are they going to go to? Nobody's going to take him in. So they have a reason to also look for an off-ramp. Again, the question is, what sort of an offer are they going to be offered by Trump? And President Trump needs to be realistic. Some of his demands of the past have been very maximalist. And he needs to maybe soften his approach. And so do the Iranian side. Because now we've seen, if diplomacy doesn't work, you end up in a war that engulfs not just the countries of US and Iran, but so much also in terms of other countries around the world.
It's utter madness, to put it mildly. But can I ask you one final question, Professor Vatanka, which is about how you think Tehran would be viewing India's position on this? India, as you know, has had traditionally good ties with Iran, countries in the Middle East or West Asia, as we call it. And now, of course, we've been very close to the Americans and the Israelis. There's been a lot of criticism in India that, the Prime Minister went to Israel on the eve of the attacks. And then we didn't condemn the American and Israeli strikes on Iran, which has still not happened, and sort of belatedly condoled the Supreme Leader's death as well. How is that going down, you think, in Iran itself?
No, I think it's no surprise that the official Iranian narrative is one of disappointment in India, particularly with the way they felt that their naval vessel that was hit by the Americans, that India did nothing really to help them. Because you got to look at this in the context of what the Iranians will call rightly or wrongly, civilizational ties between Iran, Persia, and India. And Iran has, over the years, looked at India as an emerging economy, an emerging power. The Iranians were careful not to put all their eggs in the basket of China. Wanted to, for example, we've seen in the port of Chabahar, try to give India a way to be involved in Iran because that made sense, because India is just going to get stronger and stronger in years and decades to come. But that's not where relations are today. Today, as you pointed out, India has invested heavily in U.S., in Israel, in the Gulf countries, and has essentially not been paying that much attention to Iran. That's the truth of today. Could change again because Iran is such an important land bridge. If India ever wants to go back to be a player in Central Asia or in Afghanistan, and find a counterweight to Pakistan, again, it's hard to avoid Iran. But that's obviously not where Prime Minister Modi is at. As you pointed out, he has prioritized the Israelis. And if you are prioritizing Israel in the middle of an Iranian-Israeli war, then that certainly doesn't help your relations with Tehran. But I suspect what the Indians are trying to do is this careful balancing act. I don't know if they burn bridges for good. I doubt it. I think these two countries have too much at stake. They will find a way to repair relations, but it's too soon to do anything like that.
Well, Professor Vatanka, it was great to get your perspective on this big story. Thank you very much for joining us on DeKoder today.
For having me. Pleasure.
And joining us now to take us through or try to understand what's really happening with this war is India's former Foreign Secretary, Mr. Kanwal Sibal. Ambassador Sibal, thank you very much for joining us on DeKoder today. Just wanted to get your first comments on the news that's actually just come in the last hour or so, which is of a phone call by President Trump to Prime Minister Modi. The US has said the importance of keeping the Strait of Hormuz was amongst the things that was discussed with regard to the situation in West Asia. This, I think, is also the first conversation the two leaders have had since the war actually broke out on the 28th of February. What is your first take on this and the importance of this conversation?
Well, Trump is looking for some way out, and he's trying to rope in various countries to see if some way can be found to reach some kind of an agreement with Iran. Because before this call to our Prime Minister, as you know, there have been reports that Pakistan, the General Asim Munir has offered his mediation. Egypt has been involved. Turkey has been involved. I think the Gulf countries have also been putting pressure on Trump to find a way out because they are very fearful that in case Trump goes ahead to attack the energy infrastructure of Iran, they will hit back, as they've already announced, the energy infrastructure in the Gulf countries, plus American assets, plus the desalination plants, which will bring their economies to a standstill. So I think he's looking for ways out. But the surprising thing is that on the one hand, he's been saying that, US doesn't use the Strait of Hormuz, and therefore it's not a problem for the United States, it's a problem for other countries. And therefore they should get into the act and help in keeping this open. So on the one hand, he says he is not bothered. On the other hand, he wants everybody else to join in putting some kind of pressure on Iran. Now, the fact is that we have been in touch with Iran. Our own statements prior to this call that Trump made to our Prime Minister have also said that the Strait of Hormuz should be kept open and that commercial traffic should not be interrupted. So we have also focused on this issue because it is very serious for us. So in that context, I think Trump has rung up our Prime Minister to generate pressure on Iran to keep the Strait of Hormuz open. But the fact is that for China, for Russia, for India, for Pakistan, for one or two other countries, Indonesia and all, the Strait of Hormuz is being kept open by Iran, though of course not as smoothly as before. And they have announced, the latest announcement is that they will not allow Israeli and American ships to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. So in a sense, the Iranians are playing very clever, well thought out escalation game where they are not closing the Strait of Hormuz, they are leaving it open, but for select countries, but not for the enemies of Iran. This includes the Gulf countries, apart from
Right.
Israel and
I,
is the
I, I
Gulf.
do I do think it's interesting that the goalposts for this war, for at least President Trump, have changed so much since it began, and it's gone from regime change to stopping their nuclear weapons to now keeping the Strait of Hormuz open, which was open anyway before this entire mess blew up in our faces. I'd like to welcome our other guest on the program today. This is Brian Clark, a senior fellow and director of the Center for Defense Concepts and Technology at the Hudson Institute. He is joining us from Washington, D.C. Good morning, Mr. Clark. Thank you for joining us. I wanted your take and your assessment of President Trump's claims of having some kind of a deal with Iran, Iran denying it, and at the same time, reports that U.S. Marines in the thousands are headed towards the Middle East, and therefore that has led to speculation that could there instead be a ground invasion, and so therefore could this war get worse? If you'd like to summarize that for us.
Yes, so it's clear that the administration here wants to try to keep its options open. So even though it might be conducting some kind of negotiations with Iran via a third party, probably Oman, the Trump administration still wants the ability to potentially put boots on the ground and try to seize territory adjacent to the Strait of Hormuz. And that threat would be something they try to hang over the head of the Iranians that they're negotiating with. So they say they want to keep their options open. The challenge is for Iran, it's very easy to continue to contest access to the Strait of Hormuz for the U.S. and its allies. And the Iranians don't really have to expend a lot of effort to continue doing that. And the U.S. strikes and the Israeli strikes have failed to eliminate that ability of the Iranians to threaten the Strait of Hormuz. So threatening to put boots on the ground adjacent to or even in Iran may not be a very significant threat for the Iranians, but that's the only option really left to the Trump administration to try to bring this to a resolution.
Right. Ambassador Sibal, you raised this point when you were speaking just a little earlier about the reports that Pakistan is emerging as a possible or wants to emerge as a possible mediator. And there are reports now that US and Iranian officials may actually meet in Islamabad in a few days. What are the implications of that? I mean, it is mind-boggling at one level, but given our own security and our concerns in the neighborhood, if this does happen, what does that mean for India?
I think Pakistan is as usual trying to see if they can become useful to the Americans. They have this defense pact with Saudi Arabia. They don't want to get into a real conflict that may actually happen if the situation deteriorates and if the Gulf countries join the American effort against Iran. Saudi Arabia and UAE have already said that they may be compelled to do so if Iran continues to attack them. So that will be a huge, huge problem for Pakistan if the defense pact is invoked. They don't want it to be invoked. Therefore, they are suggesting some role that they can play to mediate between United States and Iran. On the other hand, if you've seen the statement, I think it's by the president of Iran, where actually he has threatened Pakistan with dire consequences if they, as they suspect, are making their bases available for attack against Iran. I think Pakistan is caught in a very difficult situation. This is some of the things that are being aired as potential off ramps or mediatory efforts, but I won't take it seriously, and I can't imagine that Iran and Iranian Calibaf or anybody else will go to Pakistan and have talks with Bitkov and Kushner and the Vice President of the United States. I personally think this is kite flying.
You think it's kite flying? That's interesting, Mr. Clark. Do you have any views, on this role of Pakistan possibly as a mediator, and also on the issue of boots on the ground? I mean, wouldn't that be a total and utter disaster? It would mean possibly huge casualties amongst U.S. forces, and politically also that would play out very badly to Donald Trump, and he's still considering it.
Yeah, I agree that the role of Pakistan could be really important here because it could act as an intermediary to try to bring a resolution here because, as I said, there's few military solutions at this point for the United States to be able to restore access to the Strait of Hormuz. It really is going to have to be a negotiated settlement that Iran agrees to. There's not much that the U.S. can offer at this point other than just stopping the attacks. And it may be that other countries in the region might be able to offer Pakistan more to be able to incentivize them to reach an agreement. The idea of putting boots on the ground is probably is more of a ploy or a negotiating tool, probably than a practical effort, because as you said, it does create the potential for large numbers of casualties. It's unclear how successful they might be at actually restoring access to the Strait of Hormuz. There's a lot of places along the Iranian coastline where the IRGC can store weapons and that have been launching drones and missiles from. So it'll be hard to mount a effort to clean that out if you wanted to with ground troops, and it would take months. During which time the U.S. would be back in a very much in a regular warfare campaign, sort of like it had in Iraq and Afghanistan, with the associated risk of casualties.
And therefore, Mr. Clark, my final question, and before I take this back to Ambassador Sibal, is what did this war achieve? I think we're all scratching our heads. What was the point of striking Iran? What has President Trump achieved except send the world into a tizzy? And the repercussions of this economically might be felt for a long, long time.
Yeah, I guess the administration would say that they achieved thus far is they've eliminated the power projection capability of the Iranians. They've reduced the number of ballistic missiles they have. They've destroyed their navy and most of their air forces. So they've reduced the ability of Iran to threaten its neighbors. But they haven't eliminated it. As we saw, there's been missile attacks in Tel Aviv. There was a missile attack on Diego Garcia. So Iran still has this ability to reach out at a small scale and attack its enemies. But I guess the U.S. would argue that they've largely eliminated that threat. But it's a pretty substantial cost to pay to achieve that relatively modest military end. And at this point, there's not much more to be gained because it's unclear if there's a path to reduce or to remove the nuclear material from Iran, and they certainly haven't changed the regime.
Right. Ambassador Sibal, just taking a moment to step back and look at the aftermath of this war when it does end, has it not sort of reset geopolitical equations, especially in the Middle East, even India's relationship with these countries in a big way? What are the implications of how this could play out now in the coming months and years?
I think the Gulf countries are in a very difficult situation. Now they have now seen that the presence of U.S. military bases, the fact that over the years they have bought U.S. arms, they have in fact sought American protection and security against Iran, and it has not worked. So they have to redo their sums. Now, on the one hand, they would like Iran to be comprehensively defeated and defanged. But if that doesn't happen, then what do? They can no longer rely as before on American security. On the other hand, they can't even walk away and say that we look after our own security because they can't. So it's a huge dilemma that they are facing. For India, it's a very different dilemma because, in fact, the country that has been amongst the major countries, the country that has been most hurt by what has happened is India because of our 10 million people there, about 35 to 40 billion dollars of remittances, about 50% of our energy comes from there. All that is now under threat. If this continues, it is going to be very difficult for us. The repercussions back home would be very severe. And the entire model of India's overture to the Gulf and attracting investment and promoting their own visions of development, this 2030 plans they have, in which India would have played a significant role, that entire model is now under threat. And this IMEC business also now, IMEC business is also going to be, we can put it on the shelf for the time being. So we are in a difficult situation. And finally, I would say that if America does not win this the way it wants, it will change global equations. It will change the equations between United States and Europe. United States and Russia, United States and China, United States and this part of the world, which is very rich in oil resources, and the whole concept of multipolarity will gain strength, and BRICS too will gain strength, because it would have been shown that while the United States will remain the most powerful country on the world, but still they are not in a position any longer to shape events the way they want and provide security the way the other countries would want them to provide security. And the feeling will grow that American bases, in fact, can become a liability in certain situations. I think the whole sums will be rewritten, not immediately, but over course of time, they'll be rewritten quite significantly.
Absolutely, this is no ordinary war. It is a very serious conflict which has repercussions for the entire world in so many ways. Thank you very much, Ambassador Kanwal Sibal and Mr. Brian Clark, for joining us on Decoder today with your perspectives on that big story.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll be back with much more as we track the US-Iran conflict and its implications for India. Please join us again.